John Ikalowych, thank you for coming on Acquiring Minds.
Thanks, Will. Really appreciate it.
John, thank you especially because your story of acquisition is a difficult one. You ultimately wound down the business that you bought. Stories like yours are hard to come by, and not because they don't exist, but because they take a lot of vulnerability to tell, especially publicly. But let me tell you that they are very appreciated by the audience in my experience from stories like this that I have aired. So much of the standard content on this podcast and elsewhere focuses on the positive stories, the happy outcomes, but there is, as you well know, tons of risk in buying a small business. So there are, of course, plenty of instances where things don't work out. And often more to be learned from those instances than the happy ones. So, John, with that said, let's get right into your story. How about a little background on you to start us off, please?
Great, for sure. Will, John Ikalowych, I have been in business for over 20 years. The preponderance of my career was in commercial banking. And while I was a commercial banker, my last stint in banking, I organized a series of vertically integrated CEO roundtable groups and had the opportunity to sit with a number of CEOs during the formation of those groups. And through that experience, I really caught the bug to go out and do what my clients did, which was to be an entrepreneur and to run a business. And concurrent with that, in my banking career, I financed a couple of search funders for the acquisition of their businesses. And that opened up a light bulb in terms of, I should go do this myself. So I was very self-aware of the limitations of my type of personality and figured that I had always been in a sales role and needed to kind of employ more of a team approach to purchase a business. And I found a business partner through my network that had a complementary skill set, strong operations background, and had scaled and built divisions of large corporations. And on paper, it seemed like a great fit. So after some initial courtship and getting to know each other, we spent time with personality tests and went through that process to make sure that we could work well together. And after a couple of months, we decided, let's try to find a business in earnest. So I embarked on that journey and was just kind of using my network to find proprietary deal flow and reaching out to intermediaries that were representing business owners. And we looked at about 18 different companies and finally found one in the automotive hail repair space. And the market was still pretty frothy at that point. And we hadn't seen deals north of 7 figures of EBITDA that were trading under 4 times. So when we found this opportunity, it was attractive in terms of the value and the ability to self-finance the deal with our money, a modicum of investor money, and then an SBA loan. And, we were able to acquire a meaningful part of the business.
Let me stop you right there and just dive into a little bit of this pre-acquisition piece. With your partner, how well, I understand that you did the personality test to kind of deepen to understand how complementary or not you guys would be, but just kind of how well would you characterize that you knew him?
Well, it was a quick courtship in terms of deciding to become partners. We had known each other for a couple of months and had mutual acquaintances, and we're able to kind of do validation on each other in terms of our backgrounds to figure out if we'd be a good fit to work together or not.
Okay, so you didn't know each other too well, and validating the other from that person's network, and then some of these psychology tests filled in the gaps. And when you said knowing your personality, that you wanted to do this with a partner, can you elaborate on that?
I was a quintessential connector, relationship builder, salesperson. Looking at I'm a big fan of EOS or Traction, Entrepreneurial Operating System. And in the org chart for EOS at the ownership level, usually most people are visionaries. And people that are more on the horizon, looking at what's next, focusing on sales or business development, have some deficiencies when it comes to operational execution. So I intentionally looked for someone that had more of the integrator, get stuff done, keep to standard operating procedures and systemization, because I knew that wasn't a strong set of my personality.
Great. Okay. So then you said the nature of your search was proprietary and reaching out to intermediaries. I assume you were leaning on your existing network. You probably already knew intermediaries and brokers in your geography. And by the way, tell us where this is all happening.
Yeah, so I am based out of Denver, Colorado, and had spent a number of years in the business community. So I had a pretty strong network, which definitely was an advantage. As I talk with people that are searching, a lot of times people pick a city and then start to do a search. I had the benefit of having a pretty robust network to get deal flow.
Great. Now, and so take us back to this particular target you liked because it had a favorable multiple. What were some of the numbers behind it again?
So just around 2 of EBITDA, and we were buying it for under 4 turns, which, usually at that time when we were searching, you couldn't really find anything with those metrics that were, south of 6 turns. So, it was something that, we didn't want to quote unquote buy a job or have a huge, waterfall in the deal. So the opportunity to find something with, metrics was appealing on paper. But, we knew that, there was not recurring revenue. There was some risk due to the fact that we were buying a weather-related business. And, we had plans in place to mitigate, some of those issues. But as I kind of dive into the story, it'll become clear of, what happened along the way that kind of disrupted some of the initial underwriting points that my business partner and I had looked at, as well as, our investor pool, which were seasoned, entrepreneurs and, people that had bought and sold businesses. And, it was something that we had analyzed the risk, but, as I dive into the story, we'll kind of talk about what happened more.
Great. And when you say you wanted to avoid too much waterfall in the deal, can you tell people what you mean by that?
Sure. I mean, if you have to rely more on investor capital versus your own capital, there is a way for a searcher or the acquirer to be made whole, provided that, upon exit that, certain metrics are hit that would skew in the favor of the operator of the business to achieve certain outcomes. But, when we were looking at opportunities, our preference was to find something where, our own investment paired with leverage would give us a substantial portion of the equity in the company right from the get-go, versus relying upon a private equity firm to back you. And then, on the outcome could give a disproportionate share of results to the operator. But we just didn't want to get into that scenario.
And did you, private equity investors or not, did you intend to grow and then exit the business or hold indefinitely, or you were open to both options depending on how the whole story unfolded?
The plan at the acquisition was to grow the footprint of the business, open multiple offices, and then, look for some type of sale to whether it be a private equity firm or a strategic.
Okay, great. So, okay, John. So tell us. You found this business. It's called.
It was called HailCo.
HailCo, like as in hail from that falls from the sky. HailCo.
Correct. Yep.
And give us a little bit more about the business. You've told us financial numbers, but size of employees, age, management layer, et cetera. Give us a shape of HailCo.
Yeah. So the company was, about 5 years old when we had purchased it, and it had took what was a very transient storm chasing type of business where hail would come into an area, and then a bunch of technicians that, paintless dent repair technicians would come into a market, and they would set up shop. And, you see this in areas like Texas and Oklahoma, where when a storm rolls through, a bunch of people come throughout the country. And the unique nature of this business was they set up, a series of salespeople that could go out and address on a local basis, the need for people that, that incurred hail damage. So the company would be very akin to a door knocking company where we would go out, send salespeople out into, shopping centers or public areas and talk to people that had hail damage. So it was very much kind of guerrilla marketing and very much reliant on a intensive sales discipline to, manage people, get them out in the field, and to, ultimately bring in the revenue, customer by customer.
Wow. So let me just dive into this a little bit. So you've kind of already said so, but just for people from the coasts or who might not be familiar with the kind of Colorado and north and south of that region, hailstorms are a thing. It means cars get damaged with some regularity. It means roofs get damaged with some regularity. Anybody who's lived in Denver knows that the roofing industry is a very big and competitive one there, because there's always hailstorms that are causing roof damage. And so what might typically happen, or who you might be competitors with, are kind of more transient hail repair, mom and pops or independent guys hanging a shingle from their pickup truck who go around town after there's a hailstorm trying to get business. You guys were a fixed presence, a branded presence in town. But so that was one competitive differentiator. But the way that you got business was probably similar to your competitors, where, so as you said, you deployed your sales team into the parking lots of shopping centers looking for cars that had hail damage, and then kind of trying to talk the driver into taking their car down to HailCo.
That is correct. And, one distinction would be is that the business model relied upon waiving the potential customer's deductible and then offering them a free rental car. And it was an arbitrage model where, we would get a certain amount from the insurance adjuster for the damage on the car. And then we would use part of those proceeds to subsidize the deductible, and then to offer a free rental car. And, usually if you called Safeco or one of the insurance carriers and you went to one of their auto body shop network providers, that opportunity does not exist in what's called the direct repair provider, or DRP model, where you'd go through your insurance. So our job was to kind of educate the consumer that there would be another option to procure a rental car if you didn't have that coverage, plus a deductible waiver.
Mm-hmm. And you, as somebody who had worked in sales and a classic kind of relationship builder, this kind of guerrilla sales, guerrilla marketing, hand-to-hand combat in the parking lots of shopping centers, did this excite you? How did you see this as a seasoned salesperson?
It's like the ultimate test, getting out there, and, especially when, when I get into a little bit more of the story, when things started going sideways, I had to get out with our teams and go sell. It was kind of all hands on deck. I brought my teenage sons, out with me, and I wanted them to see, how hard it is to make a living. And I think part of that is, if you're running a small business, no job can be, beneath you. And there has to be a sense of like, that's not my area. Everything's your area. Everything's your responsibility, both the good and the bad. And especially when we were kind of repivoting the business, it became important to, lead by example and, get out with the team. Mm-hmm. So, that was it was quite an experience.
Yeah, I bet. And were you relying at all on Google Ads? I mean, is this something where you get online leads?
Yeah. So systematic kind of SEO, Facebook marketing, click funnels. So we employed a lot of different methods. We had affiliate programs with different dealerships. And then primarily, what I also stood up in the business along with, some key people that I brought from my banking career is we set up a B2B division, and we're trying to pivot the business to get accounts like the state of Colorado and large fleets of vehicles, so that if something happened, we would be their go-to for the remediation of their hail damage.
Mm-hmm.
So, the business had a core kind of B2C focus, but from my background, which was primarily in B2B sales, I wanted something where, I could use some of those skill sets. And, we put a lot of effort into growing kind of the corporate account side as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how large was the business in terms of people?
It would flex up and down, but in the off season, it would range about 30 to 40 people, and it could get upwards of 70 people in the height of hail season.
Okay. And what was there anything else to say that you liked about it other than the great multiple in EBITDA?
I think there was an element of, just hearing some of the stories of the salespeople that had come from disadvantaged backgrounds. And, a lot of people, this was the first time that they made six figures and, had a compass in their life. And that was very appealing. And, in terms of being able to work with people that, maybe didn't have the white collar or more privileged opportunities that I had in my life. And, this was a way that, you could fulfill the American dream. And, that is something that I did, even to this day, appreciate out of this business, is that, certain people took those opportunities and it created a great foundation to go on and become entrepreneurs or to enter into different types of sales. But this was such a great sales boot camp, and I really wanted to kind of serve people and invest into people that were trying to grow and better themselves. So, that was very appealing, upon underwriting the business.
Mm-hmm. Well, as we will find out, that's also one of the areas where it turned out to not to be particularly challenged. Okay, so do you want to talk about the transaction at all? Is there anything unusual or relevant there? Or do you want to kind of just jump right into day one?
Yeah. So I think what we'll do is I'd like to kind of tell the story of what happened, because of that'll give context to the listener base. And then from there, let's circle back to the transaction. And I'd like to cover some of the underwriting points or reflections that I had when I'm kind of going through the tail of the tape, of what I would have done differently.
Great.
So so let's just jump in. So we acquired the business in August of 2018, and the specific date was important because the hail season in Colorado would typically go from, May, June-ish up until September. So it's a very concentrated period where you're going to get most of the revenue. So in effect, we bought at the end of a hail season and knew that we needed to, run the business, kind of tighten the belt and get into, the next selling season the following May. So when we structured the deal, we set up an earn-out with the prior owner that was tied to a seller note, where they had to deliver a certain amount of sales so that we would have the cash reserves to get into the next hail season. And we they were actually able to make that earn-out, but in the process of going through the earn-out, We had kind of two sales general managers at that point, and when we got into January, so at the height of the off season of the business, one of the sales managers went and started their own company. So this was a little bit of a surprise to us, and we had a run on on half the employee base of the company, if they were going to stay with us or move on to the other company. And it split pretty much 50-50. So during that process, we just kind of rolled with the punches at that point and said, you know what, we can't kind of unring that bell, but, we do have to kind of staff up. So, we put a lot of effort into recruiting and getting, the core people that stayed, more responsibility and, more, leadership roles in the organization. And, but it was a slog. We ended up eking through, my partner and I took very little pay during that period. And, it was kind of that first dose of that entrepreneurial journey where, if you don't have the cash flow, you don't have a paycheck. So that was like the first dose of reality that, things don't always go the way it looks in a spreadsheet. So we just had to kind of tighten the belts and do what we needed to do. And we got through those months and, we're gradually getting the support of the team. And in May, we had a massive hailstorm. So May of 2019. And the company was off to the races. And my partner and I said, you know what? Let's just put all this behind us and let's just go. And we're in hail season. We finally got there. And June was a record month for the company with that hailstorm. So we had brought in over 300 cars, and the average ticket on those was about $5,000 a car, and it was amazing. So we had good energy in the sales force, and then we had a follow-up hailstorm on July 5th, and I will never forget that date. But that hailstorm happened to hit our production facility with over 250 cars in the lot, which caused a major disruption of the business, as we had 50 cars that were completely finished that we had to redo. We had to shut down the operations, take inventory of what happened and the incremental damage. And at that point, I made a phone call to our insurance agent, and he said, yep, you don't have any coverage for that. And at that point, we were truly in the emergency room and, didn't have time to process things. So we just said, all right, we're just going to have to, repair these cars for free and eat the rental car costs and just see if we can kind of climb our way out of that. But with the, incremental operational issues we faced from, having, our whole, inventory of cars damaged, it sent kind of our production times from 20 days of, to return a car to a client to 60 days. And that effectively kind of eviscerated all the profit in the company. And, at that point, we were faced with a tough decision. Do we just wind down the business, or do we try to make a go of this and kind of fight and get into the next year? So at that point, speaking very candidly, my business partner and I, it was a tough period. We have a great relationship today, but he would agree that we went through a lot of stress, and it was just an amazingly difficult period. Just going through that process of trying to figure out what to do and what would be the path forward.
And so just to be clear, on the story, so you've got all of these cars on the lot that had 300 of them that are exposed and have been repaired, or maybe not, maybe they haven't yet been repaired. But the point is that when this July 5th hailstorm comes, there's going to be additional damage or new damage that you're going to be responsible for 300 cars. So you're going to have to foot the bill for all of that labor. And because of your model, well, regardless, I mean, the point is that the responsibility for every day that you have a customer's car, you're paying $30 in their rental car
Correct.
fees. Wow.
Correct. So, it was an operational cycle time issue where every day that we did not return that car created a dent into profitability at the tune of $30 a day. So
Yeah.
it was primordial to turn the cars quickly. And, prior to the storm, it was one of the key operational metrics that we were managing to in terms of cycle time. So, this was a catastrophic blow. And at that point, my business partner and I had the candid conversation, do we just shut down the business? And, we had done an SBA loan and, I had, a cushion at that point, financially, and knew that it was going to get taken if, one way or the other, if we didn't kind of plow forward with the business. And at that point, it just didn't sit well with me to just say, you know what, I'm just going to shut it down. I think part of being an entrepreneur is having that, that cage fighter mentality where you just got to roll up your sleeves and, have the grit to deal with what curveballs are going to get thrown at you. And shutting it down ultimately was not an option. And, as painful as the experience was, that's something that I look back at and was absolutely the right move to, put your money where your mouth is. And, I wrote close to a $500,000 check, to try to save the business. And, that was really to get us into the next year. And all the while, we knew that we wanted to diversify away from a business to consumer model. And we pivoted into a B2B model. And, we got in front of over 100 different fleet directors, including the state of Colorado, different municipalities, different construction companies, and, all with the guise of developing a robust B2B pipeline so that, in the iterative hail seasons, we wouldn't have to fight out in the parking lots for every dollar of revenue, but we could have these fleet or wholesale accounts to kind of augment, the B2C business model. Mm-hmm. So, so we went through that process, and we had that little thing called COVID, mixed in, in that same period. So this was like a lesson in management 101, of dealing with crisis after crisis, because, we had to deal with the hailstorm. Then we had to deal with, getting the morale of the staff back together. Certain people quit, during that process. And, we had to fight to get the culture back and, regain the reins on the company, to be able to fight to live another day. And that second off season was very trying, but one thing that I look back on was that we got the key people in the right positions in the right seats. We promoted people from within. People stepped up, and we rebuilt the sales organization. We got the fleet accounts that we needed. And as we got into the next hail season, there was an intense amount of optimism that we had pulled all the levers that we could to move this business forward. So at that point, we were fairly optimistic, where it was like we'd gotten through COVID, we had rebuilt the sales team, we'd got the fleet accounts, and my partner and I, we kind of used the term, we're going to pull off the miracle on ice. That after all these tribulations and trials, we got into the next year, and God has a sense of humor. You're relying upon acts of God for your business. And we got goose egged with hail. So after all the preparation, we were forced to send crews up to Wyoming, which was a 60,000 person addressable market in Cheyenne versus a couple million person market like in a Denver. And, there just wasn't the volume to make the revenue numbers work. And at that point,
I'm sorry, John, you said in the second hail season, there was, what word did you say? There wasn't hail.
We had no hail. We had no hail in Denver.
Wow. So the second season, so the season you're going into with such optimism, then you get a completely dry season. You have to, and you're at a couple million population of Denver. To just get any business at all, you have to dispatch some of your crew up to Cheyenne, the closest urban market. But of course, Cheyenne is a very small city compared to Denver. So that is just a stopgap, doesn't really solve anything. Go ahead.
Yeah. So we had salespeople living in VRBOs that we rented for everyone. And, this was their livelihood too. And, it was a big effort just to get the revenue in. And we were, at that point, we had an office in Fort Collins, which was about 45 minutes from Cheyenne. And we were shuttling cars back and forth between Cheyenne and Fort Collins, just trying to make it through. And the hope was that we would get a storm in Denver and then be able to kind of get back and, get into our peak production again. And at that point, candidly, my business partner and I, we had deal fatigue, and, we were just like, we just have to kind of shut this down. So, at that point, it was almost a relief, speaking candidly, because we had fought through, trial after trial. And, at the end, it was just kind of like, all right, we just have to get on with our lives. And I had an SBA loan with the full guarantee. So, at that point it was, filing for bankruptcy and going through that process. And, so I experienced the full gamut of a wind down, where it wasn't just kind of a non-recourse loan and you just move on with your life. This permutated a lot of personal sacrifice to my family and going through that whole process. So, but when it had been so difficult for so many years, it was just like, all right, I just have to check the box, get through this, so I can kind of move on with my life.
And John, going back to the first time you considered, after that the hailstorm that did come and smashed your 300 cars, and you guys could consider at that time shutting down the business, and you decide against it. You mentioned having a lot of stress, that's a moment of tension with your partner, but also you said to yourself, no, I don't want to shut down now. I have a cushion. You said, I assume that means basically your net worth, whatever was in your savings account, that you would have lost that to the bank. But in fact, you deployed a lot of that into the business anyway, to try to keep it going. Do I have that right?
That is correct. So, I was a former banker, and, it was something, the conversation we had with our clients when things started going wrong, you looked for the entrepreneur to make the injection, to put the money in. And it was something from a character perspective that, I had to do it. And I didn't ask my investors for that money. This was kind of on me, having, a recourse loan at that point. And, it just was the right thing to do, to put the money in. Mm-hmm. And, as difficult as it was, we didn't know that we weren't going to have hail the next year. We didn't know that we were going to have COVID and go through, the beginning of the lockdown. And we didn't know a lot of those, those variables that came up, but, it definitely was the right move to try to save the business and get into the, the next selling period. So, that's something that I would redo over and over again.
Mm-hmm. And when you say that, you mean from kind of a personal ethics perspective, or strategic, or both?
Yeah, an ethics perspective. And, I think as an entrepreneur, you have to have that mentality that you have to throw everything on the kitchen sink and try to make a business work. Mm-hmm. And, that's something that, as I talk with people that were very successful in private equity or investment banking, that, want to employ, an entrepreneurship through acquisition or search fund model, and go into, the process of buying a business, I share parts of the story to kind of say, what, you've been really successful in everything that you've done, but, it's still a W-2. It's still a job.
Yeah.
But when you're running a company, like you have to be prepared to do everything in your power to make it work. And that predicates a lot of sacrifice. The last thing I wanted to do was to write close to $500,000 check, into a failing business to try to save it. But, that's the attitude and the mentality that you need as an entrepreneur.
And that $500,000 check, I assume, was a significant portion of your own net worth.
Very significant.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And okay. And so just reminding everyone of the timeline, that check after the first catastrophe with the hailstorm on the 300 cars, that was about a year into the business. And then it was...
Yeah, a little over a year into the business. That is correct.
And then it was a year later. Now we're talking where you make the decision to in fact wind down the business.
Yes. And at that point, probably the best phrase to summarize it would be deck chairs on the Titanic. Mm-hmm. Because you could have done all the strategy, got the sales pipeline figured out. But if you didn't get the weather, you didn't get hail, then there's really nothing that you could do at that point.
Yeah.
So at that point, I kind of pivoted, and like when I did the personality test, I'm in like the 99th percentile of optimism. So, I had to kind of like look at my mentality of going through this experience and figure out, what are the lessons that I learned, and how ultimately was I going to not have a victim mentality for having to wind down a company that, all these bad things happen to me. And I spent a lot of time, I have a deep spirituality, and candidly, that's the only thing that got me through the challenge of those difficult and very dark times. And just to give a flavor for this, when I was kind of at my lowest point, I remember I had insomnia one night. I went to sleep in the bedroom in our basement at our house, and I just remember shaking uncontrollably, of saying, what did I do? Like, I don't know how to get out of this situation. And I think at that point, God gave me the grace to kind of see, what? I'm not just having you go through this, for some kind of cruel and wicked sense of humor. I actually have a plan, and I have a reason why I'm sending you through this darkness. And it was that sense of like, I can't control what happens. I can't control that we had a hailstorm hit our facility. I can't control that we have to deal with COVID, and we were relying upon salespeople that were going out to generate revenue, and we couldn't do that. I can't control what happened with the weather, but the only thing I can control is my attitude, and figure out, well, what needs to change in my life? How can I become a better person through going through these experiences? And that gave me a lot of peace that, a lot of this trial, a lot of the tribulations were ordered towards helping me to be a better person. And more importantly, to be able to serve others with these experiences. So, as I look to kind of my current state where I've wound down the business, some of the most meaningful things I do is supporting entrepreneurs that are in dark times. And, it's easy to call someone that's had a bunch of successes and has never had something go wrong. But the harder one is to talk with people that have gone through, trips, and, the experience share can be that much richer because you've been in the balance. You've had to face some tough decisions. And I still see this as a mission to serve entrepreneurs that, are going through hard times, and say, you know what, we can find a way through this. So, that's kind of a crucial part of the story where I have no regret, no pity for what I went through, but simply this was something that God gave me as a gift to be able to share and to serve other people. And, if I didn't have that faith, candidly, I think it would be really hard. And, to get through it. And I could see how entrepreneurs have, you know, self-harmed themselves or did things when they faced the trials, because you could go into the drain of hopelessness. And, I was very cognizant that I didn't want to go down that path, but I wanted to have a story of redemption through these difficult circumstances to serve others.
John, what a powerful and uplifting way to experience something like that. And what I'm hearing you say is that you parlayed, for lack of a better word, this pain into kind of benefit and goodness that you're paying forward now to help other entrepreneurs. But you also said to help you become a better person. God was kind of putting you through this trial to help you become a better person. Was there any specific part of like your personality or the way you did things or behaved that you felt needed to shift in light of this? Maybe you used to be impatient and taking it out on your family and learned that you needed to not do that, or, something like that, something on the ground where if I interacted with you before this event and after this event, I would feel a difference?
Well, probably my wife's commentary on that is the most honest that I could share. And, I had always done well professionally and never really had setbacks up until I became an entrepreneur. And achieving success in business was easy. Making money was easy. I had, the means to go, actually do this, to buy a company, and had done well. And I think when you're in that mode of operating, you can kind of believe your own line of arrogance. And, ultimately this was a story of humility of, what, can you still have a self-worth and a self-meaning even when you go through trials? Mm-hmm. So probably the biggest thing was just having a sense of empathy for others when they experience trials and tribulations. It was hard for me to see the world through that lens before, because, I was privileged. I'd done very well and really had unabated success in anything that I did. So, ultimately, it was just an opportunity to gain more of the virtue of humility of, my self-identity can't be either wrapped up in my own successes or my failures. Mm-hmm. But my identity has to be merited in, how I serve my family, how I serve my teammates, my friends, those in the community. And, a lot of, what I want to do as I'm meeting with people in the business world is really to hear their story and figure out how I can serve them. So it really was a call to service.
Mm-hmm. God, beautiful, John. Now, can you tell us how this was affecting your family in these darkest moments?
Yeah, I mean, it was extremely stressful because, we didn't know where we were going to live. We didn't know what was going to happen. And to my credit, my wife, Ann, was like just the most amazing person and said, you know what? If this is for your own spiritual good going through this, we're going to figure this out. And, even if we have to live in a 1-bedroom apartment, it's going to be fine. The truth is that, we were very lucky, and it was almost miraculous on the other end where, we were able to get into another house. We weren't, we didn't have to live in an apartment. I've been able to kind of reset professionally and, find a career and a passion, for, employment now on the other end of it that's been beyond expectations. I've had the opportunity to invest into, some other ventures and still, work in kind of that entrepreneurial genre. And, it's been a beautiful experience on the other end of it. But I knew at that point I just needed to write the blank check and say, you know what? Like, I don't know what's going to happen, but it's going to be fine. And, my wife and I rallied around that. And, it's just been good on the back end of it, where I've been able to spend more time with my kids and invest in the relationships with them. Because it was just very hard to be present when you have that monkey of, I've got this weight of running this business and it's not doing well. And at that point, when we made the decision to shut it down, probably one of the big drivers was, I have to be more present to my family and, to be there for them, which was candidly very difficult when, as an entrepreneur and as a man and a provider, you're trying to, like make everything work. And, sometimes it's hard to get that balance.
Yeah. John, let's turn to the mechanics of winding down a business that you have a personal guarantee on. What does that look like? I mean, what are the kind of progression of events there?
You get a good lawyer. No, I mean, yeah.
Do you just declare personal bankruptcy?
Yeah, like we definitely consulted people, and so I really leaned upon kind of a professional network of people to get the right advisors. And similar to like when you're buying a business and you have a deal team that's going to go into the deal, if you're going into a crisis like that, I think it's really important to get the right advisors. And I went through that process earlier just as a contingency. I said I was an optimist, but when you become a business owner, you also have a sense of realism. And I'd spent the time along the way to map out the plan that if we had to go into the situation of a wind down, that we would, have the ducks in a row and kind of know what we would need to do. And that was probably one of the biggest ahas, that if someone's dealing with an issue, it's very easy to say, hey, I don't want to face the unpaltry, reality of having to maybe declare bankruptcy, so I'm not going to deal with it. But it was very helpful from a stress management perspective to have kind of got my ducks in a row, albeit as a contingency plan, so that when it happened, I had the clarity of knowing, all right, this is what we need to do. And it made it ultimately less stressful.
And can you just paint a picture? We don't need to spend too much time on it, but can you paint a picture for what it looks like? What happens?
Well, probably the trigger is you call the bank and say, you know what, this is where we're at. And we were, it was not a surprise to the bank because we'd been communicating, all along the way, and during the summer when we were up in Cheyenne, we made it very clear to them that if we didn't get, a hailstorm, this is going to be a wind down, but ultimately, when we got to the point where we knew in, the end of September that there was not going to be any more hail, that's where we just said, you know what, this is what we're doing. And at that point, you're just trying to make what I call imperfect decisions, as you're determining, what gets paid, what doesn't get paid. And you just try to apply a lens to do the most humane thing in a very difficult situation. But ultimately, it's a real tough spot to be in. As someone's going to get caught holding the bag, where it's just an unenviable position to wind down a business and to be able to make those calls.
Yeah. And they, at some point, there's a conversation, and they say, what are your assets? Give them to us.
Well, you go through a plan of what code of the bankruptcy you would go through, and it's a process, and that's going to look different for each person. But what I would stress is, Wikipedia is not the source to do that. You have to find the right advisors to, look at someone's personal situation, figure out, what would be a good plan.
Hmm.
And, thankfully, I did have very good representation and, getting the right people to support you, is huge.
And what about delivering this news to the employees in your team? What is that like?
That was a tough conversation. As we had said, we had promoted people when the business had gone through the difficult times, and we had some really loyal people that were supporting us and helping us to kind of turn the ship and get the business back into a period of success again. And I remember we were at a coffee shop and they knew it was coming. I mean, they knew that there wasn't hail and there wasn't a dry eye at the table. There was just that sense of like, we gave it all that we could. And we fought through this, but we just didn't get the weather. So I think it was, kind of that mutual sense between, my business partner and our kind of key people that, we had left it all on the table. We had fought, we had sacrificed. And, at the end of the day, it just wasn't meant to be. And, I'm still in contact with, those key people, and they've been great friendships, and it's been great to see them go on and succeed in other things. And, I'm happy to have shared part of that journey with them, but, getting the loyalty and, their support through, what was a difficult chapter, that kind of creates kind of friendships for life because, you shared in kind of this difficult crucible together.
Well, it creates friendships in life if they thought that your leadership through this hard time was worthy. There are lots of business failures where it's because the leader, drove the thing into a ditch. And so I think it's a testament to your leadership to that time that folks are still in touch with you. People still happy to be your friend and connected. John, you is that kind of where we want to leave the story? Because I think we want to circle back and kind of postmortem the acquisition, the diligence, and some things you do differently in retrospect.
Yeah, I think this is something that I always share when I'm working with people that are looking to buy a business today is some of the underwriting lessons that I learned. So, so probably like, the obvious one would be don't buy a weather dependent business, for the aforementioned struggles that we've talked about today in the podcast. But ultimately that's going to affect such a, small percentage of people that are, searching to buy something. So I did, go through some introspection on like some things that I would have done differently, that, maybe would have eliminated, just buying the business to begin with. And, if I look back at the transaction, one of the things that, I noticed was we really did not get any face time with the key lieutenants in the business. And we didn't really, therefore, get a sense of what the culture of the company was like. And as we got involved in the business, let's put it this way, that there was a values disconnect between, how I had operated in my life and, just some of the value patterns that we're seeing in some of the employees. And that created a little bit of a dissonance, as we took over because, ultimately it led to people self-selecting out of the company, and we had to, fill them with people that would be more aligned from a value perspective. But, why buy something if you're just going to have to turn over all the people? So, if a founder is exiting a business, what you're left with is the human capital that remains. And, can you get along with them? Are these people that you would even open up an equity pool in terms of state bonuses? And, in the situation that we were in, we did not get any line of sight into the key personnel. And had we had that opportunity, I think we would have potentially pulled the plug of saying, you know what, there's not the right alignment here. And, this is going to be an uphill battle because, ultimately we're going to have to turn over, people in key leadership positions.
And John, two follow-ups to that. First, I know you're being euphemistic about the values dissonance, but is there any, can you be any more specific? Question A. Question B, if you had had the opportunity to meet some of these folks, do you think a single meeting would have done it? I mean, how do you capture the essence of a company culture, or at least the kind of the character of key personnel in a single lunch meeting, even if you had been given that access?
Yeah, I think it would require a little bit more time with them. And in order to do that, this business had very low barriers to entry. And as I mentioned, when we bought the company, within a couple months, a sister company splintered out of our acquisition. And there's, as I said, very little to stop someone from going and just doing it themselves. So, especially in a deal like this, where there are low barriers to entry, once we had kind of agreed upon a path to purchase from management, the subsequent conversation would be, we need a read-in of your key people, and we are going to go into this transaction with an allotment of a profits interest or an equity grab structure where we will give them the opportunity that you had, Mr. Founder, to realize the American dream, to sell a business, and say that we want to come alongside of your key people, give them a part of the ownership, and we can build, the 2.0, generation 2.0 of this company together. That's the only thing that I would have gotten to. And with that would have given you the permission to do offsites, to spend time with them, just to make sure that it reciprocally was the right fit. Now, I don't think the founder would have given us that opportunity, because if the deal ended up not going through, he didn't want people to know that he was looking to transact on the business. But, in this type of scenario, it would have been a non-negotiable for me that, if we didn't get, some type of interaction, with the key leadership, that it would be a non-negotiable and, a walk away point.
Mm-hmm. The cultural mismatch or values mismatch that was there, can you give us a little bit more color?
Yeah, it was a rough and tumble, type of culture. I had an employee missing for several days, and one of our sales manager went to jails and hospitals, and after a couple of days, we finally found them with a cracked open skull, because people decided to do psychedelics together, and they let someone walk out and operate a vehicle. And I remember going to the hospital and saying, you know what, God gave you a second chance at your life. Like, you legitimately should be dead now. And I said, this isn't about work at this point. This is about, how do you want to live your life? And, what do you want to do moving forward? And, that was one of the toughest, kind of conversations in my life, because you realize that when people engaged in self-destructive behaviors that had real ramifications, in their lives. And at that point, you just want what's good for them. And it was very painful for me to see people get into that loop of some, self-destructive behaviors. And, you're trying to say, look, there's a way out, but that's going to require some personal discipline and accountability to not do the things that you're doing, and to elevate above, some of these demons that you're chasing. and, to kind of change your life. And, that was kind of the hard thing about the culture is that, you had certain people that did elevate and change and, they had some freedom through, getting the sales skills and making money. But, we saw a bunch of self-sabotaging as well. And, witnessed kind of the accounts of that. And, that still is kind of a painful chapter that, people have free will and sometimes they engage in, self-destruction.
Yeah. Okay. So access to key personnel would be something that you would demand in the future or wish you had demanded or whatever. Anything else?
Yeah, I think let's call it the age demographic of a founder. I had, I'd bought a business or, we had transacted with someone that was around my age. And as I talked with different searchers subsequently and just different people in private equity that do a lot of acquisitions, I think it's a judicious thing to look at a founder that has run a business for many years, but doesn't have kind of a familial point of exit, because there's, there's, for one, a longer track record of the company going through ups and downs. So, this was something that it was around for just around 5 years. And, during those 5 years, there was always hail, but we didn't, have the eye on the financials of like, well, was there a year where there wasn't hail? I mean, what do you do with that?
Right.
And so just having more of a longevity in the track record of, a 15, 20-year history where you can look at the ups and downs. How did a business do in, disparate economic cycles? And then, that sense of, what, if I'm turning the business over to the next generation of buyers, that there'd be a sense of supporting, the subsequent entrepreneurs coming in to buy it. And I think it's just a better construct when it's someone that's trying to retire from a business for those two reasons. That, there's more of a maturity, they've made their money, and it's, a conscious decision that they don't want to sell to a strategic, have the business stripped down. And they're trying to find the right suitor that will, perpetuate the legacy of the business. And in those situations, I think there's more of a likelihood that you're going to get access to the key employees to make sure it's the right fit. So I'm in commercial insurance today, and one of the first deals that I did when I pivoted from being an entrepreneur into insurance was, a good friend of mine that bought a business. And, we ended up doing the insurance for his transaction, but one of the things that I really kind of pressed him on was, this very issue. Who are the people that are exiting? Have you gotten time with key management? And since it was kind of a controlled transition, the lieutenants in that business did not have the means to buy the business. There was a lot of exposure to the management. So when he flipped the switch and bought the company, he knew what he was getting into. And by and large, he was able to retain a good amount of the employee base. And even, areas where there was tension, it wasn't a surprise. And he was able to kind of figure out, contingencies and knew what he needed to do. So I contrasted that with my experience where I didn't get that. And, sometimes with a younger entrepreneur, I don't think you're always going to get those opportunities because you're not, when you're in your 30s or 40s, you're not dealing with that idea of legacy. But if you're in your 60s or 70s and you're selling to an individual buyer versus a strategic, there can be more of a conversation of, I want to transition this business to individuals, not a competitor. And I really want to be invested in making sure that this goes smoothly so that my people are accounted for.
That's such a interesting point, John. I don't think anybody has made, any of my guests have made. Certainly it's the more common pattern that a searcher is acquiring from a retiring owner. And we always talk about the retiring owners, but I think we do that just because the pool of businesses that come for sale, the vast majority of them are that pattern, the owners retiring, silver tsunami, et cetera. But I don't think it's ever been articulated like that also often makes for a better seller and perhaps like a more healthy transition, maybe more healthy culture, more healthy business than a younger buyer. Pretty interesting.
Yeah, because in the psychology of our seller, he said, you know what, if I don't sell this, I'm just going to continue business as usual, right? So therefore, we did not get to look, peek behind the curtain and get to know the company better. But if it's a planned transition, then you're in a healthier spot where you can really get to know what you're buying with a greater degree of transparency and certitude.
Great. Any others?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that when I had an executive coach during the process of buying the company that had known me very well. He'd worked with me for several years and had known me for probably, 5 years, prior to the acquisition of the business. And, at one point during the transaction, we got to a point where, the deal was about to fall apart. And he strongly encouraged me at that point of saying, you know what? There's something not right here, John. Even if you have $60,000 of due diligence costs, and the railroad tracks are coming down, and I think you need to stop the car. And, I had this sense of, what, I've been in sales, and sales is a psychological endeavor, especially B2B sales. And, I kind of took it upon myself to say, all right, I'm going to get all the parties back to the table between, the bank and the seller and my business partner and myself. And, I'm going to play the hero and make this deal happen. And at that point, it was just like trying to get a sale done, versus saying, what degree of introspection should I be having now? And is this a sign that, there's going to be friction along the way? We shouldn't do this deal. And it was that overconfidence that made me just kind of steamroll through the process. And I wasn't listening to, my advisors, to my coaches, and I'm going to get this done. I don't want to fail at acquiring a business. And, as my coach Jan said it, I just ran right through those railroad tracks and, onto the incoming, train that came. And, at that point, if there would have been a little bit of a degree of introspection of saying, what's going on here? Is this a sign of things to come? And, should I just kind of pump the brakes? Because in reality, I didn't need to do anything. I had a successful career. But I felt this like intangible that, well, I've been trying to look for a business for a year and I just need to close. And ultimately I should have had a little bit more patience and self-awareness to say, hey, if you're getting kind of the EBGBs that a deal's not lining up for different reasons, maybe it's best to just pull the plug.
But John, I gotta push on that one a little bit.
Yep.
Because it's all about having the insight to choose when it's a good reason, to when it's a deal breaker and when it's not a particular reason. Because there's actually more. There's kind of more of a chorus on the other side saying, every deal is messy. Every small business transaction is messy. Every deal dies 3 times before it lives. So we all go into a deal expecting to get positively beaten up. And honestly, like if somebody gets through a deal and it felt easy, that's almost more of a red flag in this world. It's like, whoa, did I just really overpay? Or was this, was the seller so eager to get out of this business that they just really wanted to get this deal done? Like a little bit, or even a lot of bit of tension in a deal is almost like an expectation of health in a transaction. Yep. So how do you, so square that circle for me?
Yeah. So I agree with you. Every deal is going to die a few times. But that being said, there were, a couple instances of things that we had brushed over and just tried to solve for that ended up being kind of bigger issues and were leading indicators of, what could be some more systematic problems. And, I'm not saying this is a universal. I'm just saying that every entrepreneur needs to follow their gut and not have a bias either way. Because there could be people that are over, pessimistic, and they are, looking at an obstacle and it's primarily driven on fear or scarcity, and they don't have the confidence to kind of, overcome something. Or there's people like me that are over optimistic, and where a healthy degree of pessimism would be handy. And, ultimately, that's why you have a coach, and that's why you have someone that knows you. And as we had gone through, some of these deal points, he had some sage advice of, what, you should be careful about that. And I just was like, okay, I'm going to go into problem solving mode and just fix this or that without the reflection on whether, these were issues that should be fixed at all or walkaway points. And, this is one of the hardest things for people to figure out. But I would say if you're over optimistic, employ a degree of skepticism and try to talk yourself out of what you're doing. And if you come at things from a degree of pessimism, then it's a matter of kind of culling the fear so that you're not letting your own scarcity or insecurity prevent you from moving forward. But it's more of the self-awareness of like what bent you come from. And that'll help to kind of triage through, when a deal dies or there's some warning signs that come. But you can't just act. You have to kind of take the time, really reflect upon what's coming in front of you and figure out if this is something you want to deal with. And I had another, in my insurance business, I work a lot with people that are buying businesses because of my background. And, there was a deal that we ended up not doing because there was a big sales and use tax issue with the business. And I challenged the entrepreneur who, has become kind of a very good friend of mine. And I said, you know what, with what you're seeing here in this transaction, what else have you kind of seen that would lead you to believe that this could be like the tip of the iceberg? And is this an isolated issue? Or is this kind of a systematic pattern that if they were loose on something like, taxes, right? Should you be really buying this business? And ultimately that entrepreneur pulled the plug on the opportunity, after that conversation. And it turned out that there was, several other things which made him feel uncomfortable from a character perspective. But, had I not gone through that experience, I would not have been able to share, that, hey, when issues came up, I was just trying to triage them and not really reflecting upon what was going on. And, did they point to kind of bigger, more, systemic issues?
Well, I think that's a great framework, John. It's you see an issue in the deal and the business that you're looking to buy, and maybe a good framework is, okay, first of all, do I think this is isolated or do I think this is systemic? Do I think this is a proxy? This one thing I've uncovered is a proxy for similar stuff like this up and down throughout the business. And if so, if I do think it's a proxy, if I do think it's representative, and this, whatever this thing is, this systemic issue that this little thing I found is representative of, would I be able to deal with that? A good example of this is how aggressive expenses through a business might have been from the owner, and how gray, because there's always some, we all have some tolerance for some of the, some family expenses or personal expenses kind of being run through a business. But some business owners can really push that to the point of, being unethical or even illegal. And if you encounter that, you can say, I've seen conversations like this on Twitter. Well, okay, so he shouldn't have expensed that through the business, but we'll treat it as, we'll add it back and it's fine. And then others saying no, because if they're dishonest in one corner of the business, it's a signal that there could be minor dishonesty laced throughout the business. And you don't want a business where there's kind of dishonest, an undercurrent of dishonesty throughout. Just an example.
Yeah, that would be a very good illustrative point that you made right there. That, patterns can point to something deeper.
Yeah. Yeah. But I guess what we're talking about here, John, is really what makes this so hard, other than the operations itself, which of course is really where the rubber meets the road. But what makes every deal so hard is figuring out the issues that are deal breakers and those that are not. I mean, that's really what so much of doing a deal kind of distills to. Okay. In reflecting back, were there any other things, or were those the big ones? Tell me when you don't have any more.
Yeah, we covered kind of the main points. So
those are great. Those have been great, John. Okay. Is there anything else? Is there anything that's happened subsequently that you want to tack on to the story or the postmortem, or have you said everything that you wanted to share with this audience of business buyers?
Yeah. So just two things in closing here. I think for anyone going through this, I can't encourage enough looking at different CEO peer groups to have the support while you're going through that process of becoming an entrepreneur and you're stepping into this. It's really important to have your tribe. And when I had the business, hit the ropes, one of my good friends from Entrepreneurs Organization, had gone through a wind down at his company a couple years before. And I really, leaned upon him in terms of like, hey, this is going down, and not everyone gets this. And I need some support. I need some help, getting through this. So, leaning upon those people that have, went through difficulties, is just huge, because, your spouse can't bear the burden of it. Your family can't, your employees can't. Other entrepreneurs are so pivotal, because, they're going to be able to help you see your way out. And it's really important to have that tribe. And, with regard to Entrepreneurs Organization, it's something I'm still involved with, and they have an offsite every year. And at the last offsite that we had, they brought in an entrepreneur who had gone blind during college. And he went through a lot of the victim mentality of, facing, a life-changing illness or medical condition. And, he had to kind of walk his way out of self-pity. And he said, you know what, once I kind of said that this is not happening to me, but this is a gift that I was given, and I would not, I'm going to be more successful in my life because of this adversity. And this is going to give me grit, and this is going to give me resiliency. And he was like, I would not have been as successful as I was had I not gone blind. And,
Wow.
that was where, my eyes had opened and said, you know what, running, or winding down the business, ultimately it is a chapter of my life. But, I think I had that sense of like, I'm going to be way more successful for having gone through, one chapter of crucible than had I, just had success along the way and didn't face the adversity that I faced.
Mm-hmm.
And that gave me a lot of peace. But that really points back to, why you need to kind of be in the room with entrepreneurs and hear speakers that are geared towards entrepreneurs, because you don't always see it clearly. Sometimes you need a blind man to lead you to the light.
Great. And so EO is your organization, but I guess I was going to say, do you want to plug any in particular, but you already have. And was there a second thing?
No, I mean, that's basically it. I think it's, find your tribe and, take advantage of subject matter experts that, are appealing to the demographic of entrepreneurs, because you can get nuggets like that where, organizations like EO or Vistage are very intentional about getting content that's germane to the entrepreneur. And, some of the best ones are, speakers like that have gone through adversity and, can help people to, find a path forward.
Well, John, I think that we've reached the end then. I just want to thank you again. I want to stress that the message that you received in your darkest hours, that this was going to be something that you could then help other people with. I think you're doing in this very conversation. Thousands of people are going to hear this. And while they might not be in adversity in the moment they hear this, they will take it, I'm sure, carry it with them, because I know that there's a lot of appetite for stories of people who buy businesses and it doesn't work out. And everybody who considers this path and the personal guarantee and the enormous life change that it represents, and maybe becoming a leader for the first time, there's just so much risk and uncertainty there. And it's to hear from somebody where it didn't work out well, but they learned so much from it and are stronger for it. You've grown, and as you said, I think you're even thankful for the experience. I think will be both encouraging to people, but also just really, really valuable to just hear the other side, because acquiring minds is usually happy stuff. But as I said at the outset, it's not always thus. So thank you, John. Thank you very much. This has been a very valuable conversation. Oh, and what's the best way for people to reach out? How do you prefer? LinkedIn, email?
Feel free to share the URL of my LinkedIn page and also my cell phone. So just, I'm old school, so just pick up the phone and give me a call or send me a text, and love to have. You
sure about that?
Love to have a dialogue. I mean, this story and my journey happened for a reason. So anyone in the audience space that just wants to chat, I'd love to hear how I can help, and mainly how I can serve as you're wrestling with that immense challenge of going out and buying a business.
Thank you very much, John.
Thanks, Will. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. Make sure you subscribe to the Acquiring Minds channel below. We are now publishing twice a week, so tons of new interviews and stories to come. Stories that will help you along your own path to acquiring a business.